Hi there, this is Mr. Jansen, and today we're looking at the mid-course test. And we're just going to look at the first 7 problems of this thing. So taking a look at the first one's just using order of operations, which remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. We want to do we want to do parentheses, then exponents, then multiplication, division, then addition and subtraction. And the thing to keep in mind is the multiplication and division are tied for when we do them. So in other words, I work left to right when it comes to multiplication and division. I do the same thing with addition and subtraction, left to right, if there's ever an issue there. So with this one, I start inside the parentheses, and really I've got 2 sets of parentheses. These brackets count as parentheses, and then these parentheses count. So I'm going to start at the innermost parentheses, and I'm going to do what's inside those. And the first thing I want to do that's inside of those parentheses is the exponent. So I do 4 squared, which is 16. Then I do 3 squared, which is 9. And now again, I start over with order of operations. I go back to those innermost parentheses, and I do the addition that's left, which gives me a 25. Now going back inside parentheses, all I have left is the brackets, but again, those count as parentheses. So I do the 5 squared, which is 25. That is an ugly looking division sign. Let me try one more time. There we go. Now inside those parentheses, inside those brackets, I'm going to do the division next. So 25 divided by 25 is 1. And now the last thing left to do inside the brackets is the addition. So I'm going to add those together. That gives me a 10. And then I do the multiplication that's left, which is 220. That's it. So again, order of operations, parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division, addition and subtraction. For the next one, I'm subtracting 2 mixed numbers. And the first thing I'm going to do, instead of subtracting, I'm going to change this to adding the opposite. And now that I have that squared away, the next thing I'm going to do is, instead of working with mixed numbers, I want to change these to improper fractions. So remember, to change things to improper fractions, you take the whole number part times the denominator, and then you add the numerator. Okay? So it's whole number times the denominator plus the numerator. So when I do this one, I have to do 2 times 3, which is 6, plus 1, which is 7. So this becomes a 7 over the original denominator, which is the 3. And the whole thing was negative, so it's a negative 7/3. That's how I write it as an improper fraction. Now I do the same thing with the next one. 4 times 6 is a 24, plus 5 is a 29. And I put it over the original denominator, which is 6. And again, this one was negative, so tack that negative sign on. Now I've got to get common denominators. And the common denominator between 3 and 6 is just 6. Which means the second fraction I don't have to do anything with. The first fraction I just have to multiply by 2. And really I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2, which is going to give me a negative 14 over 6. See, now I have common denominators, so now I add the numerators. Denominator stays the same. When I add these numerators, it gives me a negative 43 over the 6. And I'm just going to leave that as an improper fraction, negative 43 over 6. Okay, and that doesn't reduce at all, so that's my answer. Taking a look at the next one, again, I'm doing order of operations here. This is a much simpler problem, but we're still doing order of operations. So with this one, I'm going to start with the exponent. And the thing to keep in mind with that exponent, let's have a little thought bubble over here. Remember, negative 6 in parentheses to the 3rd power means I'm going to do negative 6 times negative 6 times negative 6. Okay, so when I do that, the negative 6 times negative 6 is a positive 36. And then times a negative 6 is going to be a negative 216. Okay, so when I do negative 6 in parentheses to the 3rd power, I end up with a negative 216. Now I'm going to do the multiplication that's left. And when I do that multiplication, negative times a negative is a positive. It's a positive 648. Okay? Taking a look at number 4. Number 4, I have to solve this proportion. And remember, when I'm solving a proportion, what I want to do is cross multiply. And what that means, I'm just going to take one numerator times the other denominator. So here, I'm going to take the 16 times the x. And when I do 16 times x, I just write it as a 16x. And then on the other side of this equation, I do the 42 times the 9. And when I do 42 times 9, it gives me a 378. So now those things are equal to one another. So now what I want to do is I want to divide each side by the 16. So divide each side by the 16. And this one doesn't look like it's going to divide evenly, so what I'll end up doing is leaving this as an improper fraction, as 378 over 16, but I can reduce that for each divisible by 2, so that's going to give me a 189 over 8. And I could write that as a mixed number, but I'm going to accept it as an improper fraction. Number 5, it says the ratio of the number of right-handed students in school to the number of left-handed students is 9 to 1. And it also tells us that there are 360 right-handed students. And so we want to know how many left-handed students there are. So what we're going to do here is, like in number 4, we're going to solve a proportion, but this time we have to set the proportion up ourselves. So first things first, it says the number of right-handed to left-handed students is 9 to 1. And I can write that as a fraction, 9 to 1. And that was right-handed over left-handed. And then we're going to set that equal to, we just need another fraction that also has right-handed compared to left-handed. It tells us there are 360 right-handed students, so I'm going to put that up top, so 360 right-handed. And I'm going to compare that to the number of left-handed students, but I don't know how many there are. That's what I'm trying to find, so I'm going to call it x. And now for this one, I just have to cross-multiply. So I cross-multiply the 360 times the 1 is 360. The 9 times the x is 9x. And now I just have to divide each side by the 9. So I find out that x is 40. So it looks like there's 40 left-handed students. For number 6, I'm just going to simplify this. And really, this is just order of operations again, but this time I have to plug in the values. And whenever you plug stuff into an equation for a variable, really you should use parentheses. That's the best way to do it. So I'm going to do a squared minus b. Because that's really what a variable is. It's a blank space for us to plug in a value. And it tells me that a is 3, so I plug the 3 in. It tells me that b is a 4.9. So I plug that in, and now I just have to follow order of operations. So I'm going to do the 3 squared, and 3 squared is a 9 minus 4.9. When I subtract 4.9, that's going to give me a 4.1. And that's it. Okay, so we plug the values in and then follow order of operations. For number 7 here, I'm going to do the same thing. Again, I'm going to set it up using my blank spaces. So it's c squared plus 4 times a times b. And using parentheses like this will save us some hassles in the end to make things just a little bit easier for us and help us not to make some sign errors. So I recommend that you always use the parentheses to plug this in. So now let's see. C is a -5. A is a 3. And B is a 4.9. So now I just have to work order of operations, -5 squared. And since the -5 is in parentheses, that's going to be a positive 25. Plus, here I could just have to multiply 4 times 3 is 12. And now 12 times the 4.9 is going to give me a 58.8. And then the 58.8 plus the 25 is going to leave me with an 83.8. That's it. That's all there is to it. And again, the big thing here was this first guy. All right. If we punch that into our calculators without the parentheses, there's a big difference. -5 without the parentheses squared is a -25. But -5 with the parentheses squared is a positive 25. So always use parentheses when you plug these things into the expression.